What's up, everybody? Dre here, back with Dre Talk Sports, and we've got a loaded one today because there's a lot to unpack with this Bengals roster right now. We're talking camp battles that are actually worth watching, a national media take that's got people fired up, a full position-by-position breakdown of whether this 2026 roster is actually better than the 2021 Super Bowl team, and a genuinely tough financial decision the front office is going to have to make on one of their most productive players. Let's get into all of it. First, let's talk camp battles, because there's one position specifically I want you locked in on heading into training camp, and that's nickel cornerback. According to reporting out of Cincy Jungle, Jalen Davis is entering camp as the favorite to win that job, not Josh Newton, not Chidobe Awuzie, and honestly, that tracks with what's been happening on the field. Davis has reportedly been getting first-team reps consistently throughout OTAs and minicamp. Now, Josh Newton did pick off Joe Burrow in a recent practice, which got people excited, but from what's being reported, Newton was actually working at outside corner in that rep, not nickel specifically, so it sounds more like the staff was just testing whether he could compete there rather than signaling an actual change at the top of the depth chart. As of right now, the chart still reads Jalen Davis as the starting nickel corner, with Chidobe Awuzie and Amani Davis rounding out that group in the broader cornerback mix. Here's my honest concern with this, though. In modern football, the nickel cornerback spot has become an enormously important position given how much offenses live in three receiver sets now. And I think this is a sneaky weak spot on an otherwise dramatically improved roster. Jalen Davis is fine. He's a fine player, but fine at a position this important is a real consideration, especially when you stack it next to a linebacker core that already has its own question marks. Looking at his actual production, Davis posted a roughly 65 PFF grade last season, but that number comes with an asterisk because he simply didn't play enough snaps to generate a fully reliable grade. He was buried in the back half of qualifying corners purely due to limited usage. So we're working with a fairly small sample size trying to project how he handles a starting role. I'm not panicking about it, but I think it's worth watching closely, especially because there's a wrinkle here. If rookie Tycario Davis looks as good in camp as the buzz suggests, that could push Dax Hill to kick inside, which would shake up this entire equation. As of right now, though, the starting trio on paper is DJ Turner, Dax Hill, and Jalen Davis. On a much more encouraging note, Bengals cornerbacks coach Charles Burks reportedly said DJ Turner has made the biggest turnaround he's ever seen a player make. That is an enormous statement coming from a coach. And from everything we've watched on tape, it actually tracks. Turner was a second-round pick back in 2023 who battled injuries over his first couple seasons. And now he looks like a fundamentally different, more confident player. He's reportedly on track for a contract extension with this organization, which tells you the front office sees this development as real and sustainable, not just a flash in OTAs. If Turner is genuinely back to full health and building on what he showed last season, you're looking at a DJ Turner and Dax Hill combination on the outside that could be a legitimately strong cornerback duo, and that strength on the perimeter could help mask some of the uncertainty at nickel. Combine that with what's shaping up to be a much improved safety room this year, and I think the overall back end of this defense has real reason for optimism, even with that one specific soft spot still needing to prove itself. Now let's get into something that's going to ruffle some feathers, because I think it's only fair to give airtime to the doubters along with all the optimism we just covered. Nick Wright went on First Things First recently and said, and I'm characterizing the gist of it here, that the Bengals wouldn't crack his first 10 teams when ranking realistic Super Bowl contenders, and that he doesn't fully understand why Cincinnati is getting talked about as much as they currently are. Now, everybody's instinct is to roll their eyes at this. And look, Nick Wright makes a living saying inflammatory things. Sometimes he's dead wrong, and sometimes he's actually been right. But here's the thing. When you actually steel man his argument instead of dismissing it outright, it's not entirely unreasonable. The Bengals haven't made the playoffs in 3 years. The defense was historically bad, not just bad, but historically bad, surrendering a franchise record number of points last season. Burrow has missed meaningful time in 3 of the last 4 seasons. The linebacker duo last year was arguably the worst in football. And when you look across the AFC, there are legitimately 6 or 7 teams that could realistically make a deep playoff run. That's the honest version of his case, and when you lay it out that plainly, it's not some baseless hot take. Where I think he's actually missing the boat, though, is that he's grading this team based on the 2025 roster instead of the 2026 roster that's actually going to take the field this season. The team that surrendered nearly 500 points isn't this team anymore. We've talked at length about Dexter Lawrence, Jonathan Allen, Boye Mafe, Brian Cook, and Cassius Howell. That's 5 new starting or rotational pieces fundamentally overhauling this defense. Burrow is healthy heading into this season. The offensive line is arguably the most stable it's been in half a decade. I think what's actually happening here is the national media has watched this organization swing and miss on fixing its glaring weaknesses for several years running. And they're simply not ready to give credit yet for an offseason where the Bengals actually followed through and swung hard at the real problem. And look, I never thought I'd be the guy defending a Nick Wright take, but I don't think he's entirely wrong here either. I just think his framing is built on outdated information. It's the classic they've been bad, so they'll probably stay bad trap, and honestly, Bengals fans have fallen into that same trap plenty of times themselves over the years. At the same time, I think Bengals fans should hold a little bit of restraint too, because as great as this offseason looked on paper, we haven't watched a single live snap of this rebuilt defense yet. Saying this team should make the playoffs feels like a completely fair, almost given expectation if Burrow stays healthy through the season. Winning an actual Super Bowl is a whole different mountain to climb. So honestly, I kind of appreciate having a counterbalance like this floating around right now. Everybody pouring nothing but praise onto this roster creates a dangerous overconfidence, and having someone publicly pour a little cold water on the hype keeps things grounded heading into camp. Speaking of which, that naturally leads into a fun exercise, because the 2026 roster being compared to potential Super Bowl contention brings up an obvious question. How does this current group actually stack up against the 2021 team that made the actual Super Bowl run? Let's go position by position. At quarterback, I'm taking 2026, and it's not particularly close in my mind. It's still Joe Burrow either way, but this version of Burrow is more developed, more accurate, and has been a multiple-time MVP finalist with a single-season touchdown record under his belt since that 2021 run. This isn't second-year Burrow coming off a torn ankle anymore. This is a veteran, fully matured version of the same generational talent. Running back is genuinely a coin flip for me. Joe Mixon back in 2021 was coming off back-to-back 1,100-yard seasons, a true workhorse, bell cow type back. Chase Brown gives you right around 1,000 rushing yards, but adds significantly more in the passing game, closer to 1,400 receiving yards on top of that. If you want a true ground and pound bruiser, Mixon's your guy. If you want a shifty, do it all dual threat back who catches passes out of the backfield, Chase Brown fits that mold. I genuinely think it's a wash either direction. Wide receiver, I'm giving the slightest edge to 2021, and it really comes down to that third receiver spot. Tyler Boyd in 2021 was a legitimate established wide receiver 3. The current room features Chase, Higgins, Andre Iosivas, and Charlie Jones, with Jordan Young still developing. The top of the receiver room is just as dangerous now as it was back then, arguably more so given how Chase and Higgins have continued developing, but the depth, particularly Iosivas struggling to consistently be a reliable third option, is what tips this one back toward 2021, even if just barely. Tight end, I'm taking 2026. Mike Gesicki gives you a more dynamic receiving threat than CJ Uzomah did. Uzomah was genuinely great in that 2021 run and stepped up in some massive moments, don't get me wrong, but purely as a receiving weapon, Gesicki edges him out. Offensive line is not close at all. 2026 wins by a landslide. The 2021 offensive line was a genuine disaster, with Burrow getting sacked over 50 times that season and nearly suffering another serious injury during the postseason run, including the most sacks ever allowed in a single playoff game. The current line, anchored by Orlando Brown Jr., and a much more cohesive group up front, is dramatically more stable and consistent. Defensive line, I'm also taking 2026, and I think it might honestly be the single biggest gap on this entire list. The 2021 unit had Trey Hendrickson playing at an elite level, but the rest of that front simply doesn't compare to what's been assembled now with Dexter Lawrence, Jonathan Allen, Boye Mafe, and a developing Myles Murphy. Across the board, in terms of consistency and overall expectation, this current front is significantly more talented. Linebacker, I have to give to 2021. Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt were a quietly excellent duo that season. The current linebacker room hasn't proven it can operate anywhere close to that level yet, and that second-year development is genuinely critical heading into this season. Secondary, I think it's closer than people might assume, but I lean 2026 by the slimmest of margins. You've got DJ Turner, Dax Hill, Jalen Davis, Jordan Battle, and Brian Cook now, with Tycario Davis as a developing wildcard. Back in 2021, Jesse Bates was playing at an elite level paired with Von Bell and Chidobe Awuzie. It really comes down to whether the gap between Bates and the current safety group is wider than the gap on the corner side, and that's genuinely a close call either way. Add it all up, and I think 2026 wins the majority of these position battles, somewhere around 4 or 5 out of the 8 groups, compared to maybe 1 or 2 clearly going to 2021. On paper, this current roster is the more complete team. What remains completely unknown, of course, is whether that translates the same way on the actual field, because we haven't watched a single snap of this version of the Bengals yet. Let's close this out with a genuinely difficult financial question facing this front office, and that's whether the Bengals should extend Chase Brown. Brown's representation has reportedly already been in extension talks with the organization, and honestly, the case for paying him is strong on the surface. He started all 17 games last season, ran for 1,000 yards at over 4 yards per carry, added over 400 receiving yards, scored 11 total touchdowns, and finished with nearly 1,500 yards from scrimmage. Good for a top 15 finish league-wide. He's 26 years old, finishing out his rookie deal at a relatively cheap salary, and you'd think that production puts him on track for a significant payday. But graded him in the lower half of qualifying running backs last season, solidly above average, but not in the elite tier alongside names like Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry. To figure out the right move here, look at how this exact situation played out with Joe Mixon. The last time the Bengals extended a running back was back in 2020, giving Mixon a 4-year, $48 million deal. He delivered a couple more productive seasons and Pro Bowl appearances, but the organization eventually had to restructure that contract to manage the cap, and ultimately traded him to Houston for what amounted to a late-round pick. That's the cautionary tale sitting right there in this same building. Look across the league more broadly, and the running back extension market has genuinely shifted. Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry both got paid recently and immediately delivered, but both are legitimate outliers at the position. On the flip side, you've got cautionary deals like Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, and Ezekiel Elliott, all of whom got paid significant second contracts and quickly became cap casualties. Even Christian McCaffrey's record-setting extension came with an immediate decline afterward, even though he's still elite overall. The broader league trend has shifted hard toward not paying running backs long-term. Guys like Saquon, Tony Pollard, and Josh Jacobs all got franchise tagged rather than signed to extensions, and a 4-time 1,000-yard producer like Najee Harris settled for a modest 1-year deal in free agency this past offseason. That's simply the market reality at this position right now. So where does that leave Chase Brown? He's good, genuinely good. But he's not in that Barkley, Henry, McCaffrey tier where a team feels forced to bend its entire cap structure around him. My read here is that the smart move is a short team-friendly extension, something in the range of 3 years, maybe $7 to $8 million annually. That keeps him locked in through this current contention window without handcuffing the cap, especially with the Bengals already having committed serious money this offseason to Dexter Lawrence, Jonathan Allen, and Brian Cook on top of restructuring Burrow's deal. The cap is genuinely tight right now, and Brown's production, as strong as it's been, doesn't quite justify bending the financial structure of this roster around him the way an elite back might. The other path, of course, is the front office simply lets him play out his current deal and plans to replace that production through the draft next year, since quality running back value tends to show up reliably in the second and third rounds anyway. I think there's a real chance this ends up in a quiet standoff, Brown staying patient, hoping for a bigger long-term commitment. Similar to how both Chase and Higgins waited out their own extensions and eventually got paid, while the front office shows restraint given the broader market reality at the position. As much as I genuinely respect what Chase Brown has put on tape, I don't think those numbers are strong enough to justify locking up significant long-term cap space at a position the league has clearly decided isn't worth overpaying for anymore. So that's where things stand heading toward training camp. Watch nickel corner closely because it might be the one real soft spot on this roster. Keep an eye on whether this defensive overhaul actually translates onto the field early in the season, because that's going to settle the Nick Wright debate pretty quickly one way or another. And keep watching how this Chase Brown situation develops, because it's going to tell us a lot about how this front office plans to manage its cap going forward in this new contention window. Let me know in the comments where you land on all of this. Is this 2026 roster actually better than the 2021 Super Bowl team? And should the Bengals pay Chase Brown or let him walk? Smash that like button and make sure you're subscribed to Dre Talk Sports, because we're covering every angle of this league all year long. I'm Dre, and I'll catch you in the next one.